I'm glad we can be together, even though it's in this fashion. It's good to be here with you. The text that we have for today, epic. I'm sure your knees were a little exhausted by the time we got to the end of it there. It felt a little repetitive, too. How many times did this poor man need to explain that he had mud put on his eyes? And particularly in this time and place where we're very consumed with all things medical, it seems like mud in the eyes is not going to be a recipe for healing anything. But nonetheless, that's where we start. It's a reminder to us that Jesus the Christ, who came among us as one of us, came in a very tangible way, in a way in which there was touch. Touch. Something that just seems beyond the pale now. Have you noticed it? I'm sure you've been out and about, out on a walk, on the sidewalk, and people are very carefully now moving out into the street to give people space on the sidewalk. Jesus is often touching people that society says he shouldn't be touching. It would be as if it was today and we made a point to walk right next to people that we didn't know on the sidewalk. Jesus is among us as one of us, touching, being near. And not just touching and being near, but healing. Think about that. There's all kinds of touch, and it's not always healing or welcome or wholesome. Sometimes, in fact, it is even an issue of harm towards others. This story could have been any number of ways. We could have heard a story of healing. We could have heard a story where someone is ignored. We could have heard a story of violence today. But today's story is about Jesus. And as people of faith, we know that it is therefore going to be a story of inclusion. It's going to be a story of returning someone to wholeness. It's going to be a story of healing. Now, there's a couple of other parts of this story that I think are important. The question initially in running through this text seems so out of date. Why was this man born blind? Did he sin? Or was it his parents who sinned that caused him to be born blind? And this seems like such an archaic understanding of how the world works. And in many ways, it is. But let's maybe use a more current phrase. What did I do to deserve this? Right? It's that eternal human question. A question that we always ask ourselves when something goes wrong. We might think even as a nation, what have we done to deserve this? We think of people all around the world, the people of China, the people of Italy. We think of all kinds of places where people are looking to heaven and saying, what did we do to deserve this? In the midst of all of this crisis, we understand that Christ is present among us in a way that gives us hope and healing. A sense that we are called to this work of hope and healing as well. Perhaps in this moment it's a calling to space and giving ourselves room. A sense that we need to be kind to one another as we learn new routines, and to understand that as the days blur, there might be anxiety and weariness and a loss of community. This morning I had an interesting revelation. I got on my bike and was in my driveway and heading out, and I was all in my uniform, not the robe, of course, that's awkward on the bike. But as I was heading out, two of my neighbors were in their cars and heading somewhere as well, and they both looked very intently at me. And I don't know if maybe there was a little bit of concern of, is their church still operating? What's going on? But it occurred to me that it's kind of cool that they saw me on a Sunday morning and thought, he must be going to see a group of people, a community. And while that's true through the window of the computer here, it's not true here in person. But in our hearts, we know that we are bound together in a communion that brings us together in the life, death, and resurrection of Christ and gives us hope even at times when that may feel a little elusive to us. The last thing I wanted to mention is in regards to the first reading. The first reading today challenges us, I think, in our current context because it discusses leadership, the leadership of the king, and who has the kind of leadership that is the leadership necessary for the moment. Now, Samuel is going down the line and looking as to who God is calling into that place. But I think in this day and age, there are times in which we have a lot of angst about leadership. But the good news is throughout this whole wide world, there are many amazing examples of leadership. Leadership in truth, leadership in hope, and in science, and in fact, and in a future where humankind can engage in community in a way that is healthy and whole. Let us be a part of that leadership as well. So as you think of the reading that we have here today, we are not being tested because of some kind of failing on our part, but we know that in the midst of our testing, Christ is present with us in a way that brings hope, community, and healing. And just as the sun rose today, we have hope in today and tomorrow. The second part, as we move into this week, is to look towards leadership that brings truth and hope in energy towards healing and wholeness, not just for some, but for all. Amen.